Are video games cool?
I think they're getting there. Like there is, I mean, the fact that like Twitch
They're
is so
getting
big.
there. So they're not cool. So they're currently not cool.
Where it's like, I don't know, like there's millions of people watching videos of like 14-year-olds taking headshots and like.
Also, they're popular. So is popular the same thing as cool, or like I'm sort of, these are kind of tongue-in-cheek questions, but I think they very much inform everything else that we've been talking about.
I get your point totally. Like I think there is like, am I watching this because like everybody else my age and like my friend group is watching this, or is it like something that I genuinely appreciate and like that was a sick shot, like like I don't know. I think that's a really, really good question. Like when did something cross that threshold versus like was there a time in history where like if you transport Michael Jordan back in time, like he does this nasty dunk, when people would be like, what is that? What?
Boo.
Yeah, lame.
Probably. I mean, don't you think?
I don't know. Like, I have a hard time with that because it's like when it's something that's like physically, like it's a physicality thing. Like, I don't like. I have such a hard time thinking is like, was there ever a time when, like doing a dunk was not cool? Like, or like, but in other senses, it's easier for me to think. I don't know. It's like it goes in cycles too. Because if I saw somebody using nunchucks at the park, I probably think they look like a doofus. But like 200 years ago, you're like, oh yeah, that guy's the man. Like,
well, so I think what we're saying is like all this, none of this exists in a vacuum. And I think like for me, where I can sort of bump heads is like when I talk to people who like have 100% their minds made up about these types of things with video games, they can't seem to acknowledge that like they want it to be in a vacuum, and there's probably a number of reasons for that. But I used the word tribal before, and I mentioned very vaguely like online dramas about video games. I think I mentioned a little bit about this in my email. Like I feel like just because these kinds of things are A, difficult to talk about, B, don't really have answers, C, 98 more reasons. like I feel like we tend to, accept like sort of like superficial labels on things, or we kind of are okay with like just kind of like uncooked terms as a way to think about stuff that we don't really want to, because you can't really dig into everything all the time because you'll never get your pants on in the morning and never go anywhere and never do anything. But like, like I mentioned to you, things like, people even generationally like hating EA but not really knowing why they hate EA. Like there's all sorts of stuff like that where I see it often described as tribal, but I'm not really sure that's exactly it. Like I feel like it's sort of connected to tribalism, but it's not, but it is, and I know it's not unique to video games. Like it's like I don't know, like if you've seen this type of behavior, and like what do you feel it is? Like, is it actually tribal or is it something else?
I don't know better. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think I do.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's a better word for discussing it. It kind of reminds me of like, when you're in high school and you kind of just know what are the cool bands to listen to. You're like, oh wait, no, like don't let anybody see me with the Sublime record. Like not now. And like there is kind of that. Like you had mentioned like the joke about somebody made an EA joke and somebody laughed. And then the guy laughed. He's like, I don't know why I'm laughing. I just know like EA is kind of a joke or kind of a punchline.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting. I think for the same reason you do, where like, when you're talking about what band is cool or whatever, like, oh, that's kind of just a normal thing everybody experiences. And like bands are a very mainstream thing that like, and just like where video games, even though I'd argue they are mainstream, they're also like not mainstream in the same way that like bands and music are. Like they're still like being able to laugh at like a joke about like a niche video game thing, or even like EA, which is probably not a niche video game thing. Like being able to laugh at that still seems kind of like, again, this word we keep using, it's like weird. It's like, why do you think that's, or me making like you're like a Kenji from Overwatch joke to somebody is like, a weird thing to like have the complex emotions, like the weird emotions I had about like, oh, my poser for making that joke. Like that's a weird thing too. Like, would I feel weird if I was making like a football joke or some a band joke of like a band I don't listen to, or like people were making Nickelback jokes. Like people were making Nickelback jokes that never like listened to a Nickelback song because Nickelback was just like a cultural punchline. Or maybe they did. I don't know. Nickelback's not a bad band. I'm gonna go on record saying that.
I always like, I don't know if it's just because of it's probably a number of things. It's no single thing, but like I always, that's an easy way of bonding, of being like, hey, I know this thing that most people think sucks. I also think it sucks. Ha ha ha. Aren't I, please accept me. I belong. But like, I find that often, that manifests in games too, like this tendency that we have to like single things out, and it's like I turned a corner at some point many years ago where it's like, well, something is always everyone like that could be someone's absolute favorite thing that helped get them through a difficult time, and it means something to them, and it's just like, are we actually saying that like that person just deserves to go through life in more pain because we wanted to laugh at whatever? But to go back, like, I don't know, I think the phrase you used was like games are, I think in the email you said like the games are continually in the process of mainstreaming themselves, and I think you said that with connection of like, because they're products of a capitalist culture. And I think about this mainstreaming a lot, and that word means a lot to whoever you are and depending on what you do. But what are the ways in which you feel like you observe video games are navigating those obstacles? Like, and are they navigating them well? Like what are they currently in the process of mainstreaming? Like how are they trying to become more mainstream now?
I think that the first like moment I had like an awareness of this was when Final Fantasy VII came out, and they had a commercial for it, and it was like a theatrical trailer, and it was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. And kind of like ever since then, it's just kind of been like, oh, like this isn't just a thing for me and all my nerdy pals anymore. I was on TV, and so it kind of seems like, there's like, it's like this slow erosion, like, there's like that happened, and I don't know really. I mean, I was like 17 at the time, so I don't know what the commentary was on that. But like, as I'm adult now and watching these things, and I'm kind of taking this like meta view of like, oh, you see like esports come along, and there's like, oh, and I'm a sponsored Call of Duty player, or I'm a sponsored StarCraft player, or whatever, and like, people chuckle at that, and then it's like a year goes by, and it's like, oh, they're not chuckling anymore, and like maybe they still are, like. These things just have this like slow erosion of like, and I don't, it's not like a top-down directed thing. It's just kind of people like, what can I make money doing, or what is cool to me, and what am I going to get away with, and like, what can I put online, or what can I make that's going to like, and are people going to glom onto that? And there's always that X factor of like, oh, maybe people are going to really take this in a direction that nobody knows where it's going to go, and it's going to become this huge cultural phenomenon that nobody anticipated, and like, what ended up spinning its own thing out. And then I also think there's like huge directed, I work in media, so I kind of, I know some of this stuff works. There are people making these choices of like, I want to try and make this the next big thing. I want to do this. And to answer your question more directly, I think a lot of it is like, branding video games is not video games, like with mobile gaming. I think that there has been some of an effort to not let those kind of games fall under the same banner as like, console games, and like, although there's exceptions to that, where there's games that are kind of like marketed as more theatrical or immersive or whatever, versus like your typical like puzzler or strategy game or whatever you're going to play on the subway. I also think like you see a lot more franchises now, and you see a lot of investment in franchises, and like the way that franchises are being handled, like the God of War game. Same way with movie franchises, like rebooting a franchise with no number at the end instead of, where, you used to be able to be like Superman 5, Superman 6, Star Trek 7, whatever. Now it's like, oh, we're going to do this, and video games are like being put out and marketed in ways, not just like in the naming conventions, but in the way that they're handling the IP is very similar to movies and TV shows. And I think that there are like people in the industry taking lessons from that. And within video games, there's so many layers to it. Like I mentioned in our email, like the people listening to this are going to be so frustrated. Like, what is this email thread? But in our email thread, I mentioned I have this friend who works in the industry. He's an environmental designer. And we have, like, the conversations I have with him are just, I wish they could just be published. They're so fascinating. But he has talked about this stuff. And I think, like, even when you get to that level within the video game, they're designing the environments and the interactions you have in these games to feel like you're in a movie. Like, it's not just you're following a character around. Like, you know, you saw this with some of the early Tomb Raider games, I think, where the camera would change and like pan out and show you like in a room, and you would get this view of like, oh, like, you know, and then as you're trying to solve the puzzle in the room, you're kind of like recreating the camera pan as it went around this shot. Or like, you know, when you're going through God of War or whatever, like the camera will pan out and show this big monster come in, and it kind of like sets you up that this is like a big boss fight.
Yeah.
You know, video games have always kind of set up the boss fight in a certain way, but now it seems more theatrical, and it seems like they're coming in and I don't know if that answers the question. I think that yeah, it's this process of constantly mainstreaming. It's like taking other things that are like already mainstream in culture, and not with the conscious effort of, maybe with the conscious effort, like we're going to make this mainstream, with the conscious effort of like, we want to sell more units. Like at the end of the day, video games are a thing that are bought and sold for money. And so I think that, you know, there's an artistic aspect where people are like, I'm going to do something that's pure or whatever, but like, there's also the aspect of like, I need to make this thing that's like going to sell units or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it a little bit back. I mean, you said that video games are not mainstream in the way that other things are, and this connects with something else that I vaguely alluded to. You know, like look at something like the Death Stranding trailer, and just sort of the way that some video games of certain budgets and certain scales and scopes were like, that now is part of their marketing, is like, look at the people that are cast in these roles, and it's not just, you know, like a Pixar thing where you just can guess, oh, is that so-and-so? Like, you actually can see their likeness in the whole thing. And so I don't know, like, that seems like a very surface, almost shallow, although I'm sure very expensive way to sort of offset perceptions. It'll be interesting to see what the ripples of that will be 5-10 years. Like, I don't really think that was the thing that was like, I don't think that alone is going to neutralize or offset the perception that like video games are weird. Like, it's not like they were missing famous people. Like I would be interested to see, like, you know, maybe that'll be a move that will help bring more people to the table, and then I don't know, maybe that won't, you know, trickle and lead to like other different types of approaches being taken. But I think that's right at sort of the, you know, flirting with, are they mainstream? Are they not mainstream? Like, this was a question I wanted to ask you, and this does connect, which is like how do video games influence our culture / do they influence our culture?
I mean, the second question first, I think it's undeniable they influence culture.
Yeah.
You know, there's really like overt ways, like Wreck-It Ralph is like,
yeah.
You know, and it all depends on like what you define as culture. Like, other products of culture. Culture is like, you know, is culture something that we just carry around inside of us, or like that we accept or not accept as culture? Like, then that gets like that's another phone call, I think. But I think that the way they do it is by this kind of like slow. I don't know, man. It's so weird to me, like what gets accepted and not gets accepted in culture. And I know I'm going to be evasive again, but it reminds me of One Piece, which is like the Japanese comic book. I don't know if people know. I just found out about it like a month ago, I think.
Is that the pirate thing?
It's the pirate thing.
Okay, there you go. That's the extent. I know. And it took me a moment to to poker face and remember that. Yeah.
Dude, it's insane. It is so over time, Batman and Superman are the two top selling comic books. Like, if you count like all the books they've sold since the 20s or whatever when they came out, the One Piece has been out since '99, I think, or '98, and it is almost outsold both of them. It's like creeping up. It's gonna, by the end of its run, it's gonna eclipse both of them. And year by year, its annual sales currently are like 4 times the amount of both of them combined. It's like it is the most popular comic book on the planet by strides. And yet, like, you and I have never heard of it. People have never, like, it's not mainstream in this culture. If you were to, like, you know, as like a statistical exercise, if you were to look at the planet Earth and be like, what is popular on planet Earth? It's like, oh, One Piece, the pirate comic book, is very popular on planet Earth. If you bring that into America, it's like, oh no, that's wicked weird. If you were gonna get a straw hat and like, what, you know, dress up like Luffy the Monkey the Pirate, like, and so.
I have a friend who has read it, and it took me a moment to connect. There's also like is there like a gangster who can turn into a castle or something? Or there's like a lot of stuff with food, like someone turns into a castle and eats food.
Dude, probably.
Okay.
And that comic book is so wild. It has the most insane characters. I've only read the first book, and. Like, the guy who draws it, like, his character designs are out of this world. It's, like, almost worth reading just as, like, the people he comes up with are nuts. Like, you could say anything, and I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's probably a character in One Piece. Like,
okay, I think that's right. But no, I mean, it is interesting that, like, I guess, like, so there's popularity, and then there's social desirability, and then that's sort of, you know, cool, that question of cool, I think that's sort of, that's a more snooty way of asking about, you know, whether something is cool matters. But it is interesting that, like, what is it that, you know, has that social desirability? And I think anime, I don't know, I don't think that's, like, it seems like it's sort of, it's relegated, so, like, it's not like a cool thing in the West, but it's not, I don't think it's as shame-filled as it used to be. It's just, you know, you're not going to be at the grocery store and overhear people talking about anime.
Yeah, and it's still kind of othered in a way. Like, there's still like a hyphen involved with it, or it's like, you know, it's not The Simpsons. You know, it's a different kind of animation. And like I think the same thing kind of like with food too. Like, you know, I like to eat, and so I think about food. And one of the things I always think about is like a burrito is, you know, I think you know, maybe I'm wrong on this, but it seems like that is classified as Mexican food, or like a Mexican-American food at the most. But it's not even Mexican. Like, it was invented in America by Mexican immigrants, I think. And yet, like, pizza is considered American food, but like a burrito is not. And like, there's certain things that are like, they take a lot longer to get accepted by the culture, or like maybe never get accepted by the culture. Or like, and I feel like video games, like, they just carry an like, maybe this is a stretch, but like they carry an attachment to another, or like a perceived attachment to a different subculture, be it a culture, like a real culture, like Mexico and Mexican culture, or like a kind of like an identified culture where like anime fans or like video game fans or something, where it's more of like a culture by association versus like a culture by, you know, birth or nationality. And I think that the broader culture, like capital C culture, has a way of like somehow deciding like which things are going to carry a hyphen or carry an otherness, or carry like, this is something that is not fully, it's not 100% part of like the steam train of culture. It's going to be like a hanger on, it's holding on, you know, or it's following in a car off to the side or something.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of this stuff, you know, if you use capital C culture, like a lot of the stuff as it pertains to these questions about video games, which I find interesting, and hopefully you still find interesting after speaking with me, you know, they feel a bit like they've been put back on the shelf as other bigger things are sort of occupying the spotlights or our national attention. And so I guess that's just sort of like a thing to consider in balance with this next question, which is a similar sort of how you know, I guess I'll just ask it. It's just like, you know, like how do you feel video games shape our national and personal identity, or do they not?
I think they do in some way. I just don't know how. It's Like, I don't know, it's so diffuse. I think the best way to, like, I've never thought about that. I think the best way to, like, go about answering it or go about thinking about it at least is just, like, what would our national or political or, like, what would all this stuff look like if you were to just suddenly make video games disappear? And I don't, I had to think about that because I mean, that's the way I have to approach it.
Right.
And it's unfathomable. Like, how would things, I don't know, what would replace video games is like the thing people were all doing with their lives, and how would it replace is like, I think a lot of the influence that video games have in culture is really subtle on like a broad scale, but I think it's still important. Like it's subtle, but it's still important. It's still something that people like recognize, and I don't know, like, to the same degree that like salsa dancing and like, I don't know, like horticulture, I mean, not horticulture, that's not a good one, but I don't know, like if like salsa dancing was to disappear, like, it's a very cool subculture, but it's also like if it were to disappear and there's no, or like yoga or something, it's like, what if yoga disappeared? Like, what would culture look like? Like, how does yoga influence national politics? Like, I guarantee it does, but I don't know how. Like, and I think, I don't know, you have to do some kind of lab experiment. Maybe that's my profession showing or whatever, but
maybe
I don't know. I think that's a really good question.
Thank you. Well, maybe it's like they influence in the broader echo chambers because these are now things that you can buy targeted ads to people who self-identify as belonging to that subculture, or who leave digital breadcrumbs in a way that, but I don't know, because it's like, the handful of things I said before about money. I think money is sort of one way you can communicate that this subculture matters or is important, is like, well, look at how much money it's generating. It's however many times the NFL. I've lost track. I haven't crunched those numbers in a while, and I always felt like that's a very surface way of looking at it, because like revenue is not the same as cultural influence. But I feel like just because a lot of money is made, who knows how much the quote unquote yoga industry makes. Like, it's such an arbitrary marker that we have in at least in our culture of like, well, if people are making a lot of money doing it, must be worth something. But I feel like that doesn't really articulate like what interests you or me about video games. And I don't know if you or I could articulate it, because I think maybe this would be the chance to sort of bend back to that question I asked earlier. Is like, well, what do you think it says about us that things that are weird, quote unquote, can be important to us?
Right. Well, to touch on, I do want to touch on what you said. I think the money question, I think you're right. Like, it doesn't, like, money is not a one-to-one, like, what is important and what means something in culture.
Yeah, because like I know to communicate that with other people, I'll say that, but also like, who cares?
Yeah, but money is also a good indicator of like time and because time is the best. Yeah, time is the only really, like, maybe the best indicator of like what it is, and money is a surrogate for time. And so in that sense, like, yeah, it is important to look at money, but money shouldn't be the answer to the question. Like, but money should be like a clue on the way to figuring it out, which. By way of that, to just jump straight to the other part of the question. Sure. I think, and as I've been thinking about your previous question of like how to measure the influence these things have, I think one example of that is Dungeons and Dragons, which, a thing that still a lot of people think is weird, and it's like enjoying a resurgence right now, which is like really cool. I definitely like spent my formative years in high school like playing a ton of D&D, and it's like, but Dungeons and Dragons has been around since the 70s, and some of the most creative people in our culture, a lot of the most creative people in our culture played D&D when they were growing up or at some point in their life. Yeah. And that has impacted the way that they create culture, that people that have laughed at or like never heard of Dungeons and Dragons consume. Which also reminds me of, I probably stole this idea now, I'm thinking about it, an essay that Chuck Klosterman wrote, I don't know, a couple years ago or whatever. It was in one of his books. But he was talking about, he was like, I'm sad that like I'm never going to read the Harry Potter books, but like I just don't want to read them. But he's like, I'm sad about that because like the smartest coolest people right now. Like the most creative people are all being influenced by Harry Potter. And so to me, Harry Potter references, like not like overt and then like, not overt references, like just things that people picked up and they don't even maybe notice themselves.
Yeah.
They're going to be culture. And I'm not going to pick those up and I'm not going to appreciate them. And therefore my worth as a person who appreciates culture is going to go down. Like I'm diminishing my own experience of like broader culture just because I'm lazy and I don't want to read these kids' books. And I think that that's kind of like the analogy I guess I'm reaching for with the like, maybe not as direct as that, but like with Dungeons and Dragons or video games is like, there's one side of it where it's like, has this seeped into the culture to the point where like people are talking about it in grocery store aisles and like, it's cool to talk about neighborhood barbecue and stuff.
Yeah.
There's all like, how much of like the TV or whatever you and I or whoever consumes is influenced by like, Final Fantasy or whatever.
I wonder if the fact that there isn't a, concise answer to that is part of the answer. Like if we knew the answer, like I don't think either of us would find all this stuff that interesting or this captivating or whatever. Like I think of have you ever seen the show Mad Men?
I haven't.
You haven't? Okay. Well, it won't do much good for me to drill down with a specific quote, but I can just sort of gloss over and say that there's an episode early on where they start rolling out computers in the office, and Don Draper, I don't know, they're like just trying to sell him on the amazing potential of computers, saying something like, it can calculate however many stars there are in the night sky. And he says something about how like, well, whoever laid down at night looked up and thought of a number. So I think that just connects here, and I think it even connects with food, where it's like, we may be attracted to it because of the way it tastes, but what our body ultimately doesn't care about the way it tastes. That's not what's keeping us actually going.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have like a poignant question to tie that all to, but I do have maybe just one or two more questions here for you. Was there something else that you wanted to, like as I was sort of shaking the tree of your brain, some thoughts that came up that I didn't give you a chance to talk about yet?
No, I mean, just referring to, there was one thing that we talked about in the email thread, and I think I just wanted to, it was something that kind of I didn't realize until I think our email thread, and we were talking about the importance of video games as a cultural artifact, or like how they influence culture.
Yeah.
And I think this goes back to like the people who make video games and how they're made. And, I know talking about journalism is boring to people, so I'll keep this as a minimum, but I cover infrastructure also, and like, how people build bridges or design new types of tires, or like, develop a new type of medicine or stuff. And like, I think that's fascinating because it's just a staggering group project where like, everybody's giving it their all. Maybe there's some slouches in there, but the checks and balances are just to the point where like, when a bridge collapses, it's worldwide news. And that's because like making a bridge is like a thing that everybody's really good at. And like they put their best effort towards, and like the quality of the product that comes out is just like magnificent. And when you start digging into how video games are made, there is, a lot, it's the same structure of effort that goes into it in abstract terms. Like you have like project managers upon project managers and engineers that are like just as, skillful as people that are designing bridges. I don't know, maybe I'm breaking it, strung up for saying that, but people that are like developing the physics for like character to jump around, or like developing an environment or something, or like developing the marketing plans or the storylines and stuff. These are some creative, technically skilled people, and they're working together on these scales where there's like hundreds of people on maybe even thousands of blockbuster game, like Call of Duty or something. And these products, like whether or not they get panned in reviews or whatever, like they're super impressive. And the people that are making them are also doing other stuff in culture, and like just like the effort of human activity that goes into it is just another aspect of how these influence culture. and we touched upon this, like how can you be a professional gamer or whatever. There's people that are like professional, people that decide what button does what. And I just think that's like, that too is just so fascinating. And that the aspect of like what video games mean in culture is like, culture is also the work we do and the work we value. And like, I can get like really poetic or whatever about this, but those people that make it and the organizations that come together to make these video games are just incredibly impressive to me. And I don't know where I'm going with that, but I just wanted to touch upon that because, that was something that came up earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was actually something. I understand your reluctance to navel gaze on journalism stuff, because that's a whole other separate conversation that you and I could have that maybe only you and I would find interesting. I'm always interested in parallels, and I asked before some shallow stuff about, was this similar to tennis? Was this similar to tennis? So covering science and transportation, I mean, I'm curious, like, what's conceptually similar between those areas and games and sort of the way conversations seem to be approached about them online? Because I think you did lay out a little bit about parallels of sort of, the importance of building, literal and metaphorical bridges. Because I just think people think of video game culture as like this other country that they don't know how to visit, and they don't understand its customs, and they don't understand its language. Like, it may as well just be a foreign country to them. But in your beats and in the sort of observing you're doing about video games, the common denominator is it's all human beings talking about these things, but do these three fields have more in common with behavior, with whatever, than they might suspect?
Yeah, and I think this is something else that, like we talked about at the beginning, is the importance of entertainment. And video games get written off. I think one of the things where they get marginalized, or like where people don't take them seriously, is that it's just this activity that you play on a screen, or like you're playing by yourself, or all the things people say about video games, or all the jokes people make about video games. It's fulfilling a human need for entertainment and interaction and like engagement with the brain, that we've had surrogates for throughout. You look back historically, and that's something like anthropologists and archaeologists and stuff, they always kind of like look for, is like, what was the entertainment that was being had at this time? And the video games are filling that role. And like, in the same way that like when you have a civilization, you look for the infrastructure they had, you look for the way that they treated their sick or dying, their wounded, to tie directly to the examples I gave, which are, medicine and bridges. And you look, and then a lot of times, specifically like, Rome or whatever, even like Maya or the Mayan cultures, the Aztecs, for infrastructure. And, you would see like, there's people whose jobs are, and there's organizations in place that, match whatever culture they're in. But there's people putting effort towards these things in a concerted way, and it feeds back into the culture, and it feeds back into the way that people perceive these things as being important. And video games today, the structures that are in place to make them happen are similar in an organizational sense to the way that things like bridges and medicine and science and all these other things that kind of have this like de facto importance to them, or people take them seriously just by the very nature of like the word infrastructure or bridge, because there's a physical manifestation of like life and death. But like, what if you took away all entertainment? Like, people would, I don't know if they'd die as quickly as if you took away like a bridge trying to cross. Like, I don't know, the metaphor is not one-to-one here, but like, I do think that video games are fulfilling some aspect of a basic human need. Not necessarily in the exact same sense as a bridge or, a pill is doing, but like, if you're trying to treat an ailment, a pill is one way to do it. There's other ways of medicine. There's other ways of crossing a chasm and building a bridge. There's other ways to fulfill our needs for entertainment than video games. And just the way that we've chosen somehow as a society to fulfill those needs through video games, and then, organize ourselves to concentrate our effort into making these things. to me is similar to the way we concentrate our efforts towards like this thing called medicine that we've arrived at in a sort of scientific way, or this thing, called bridges in engineering, which we have arrived at in, other ways. I don't mean sort of scientific to diminish the work and stuff that goes into making a medicine and making a drug.
Yeah.
But you get what I hope I'm making sense here. And I don't know if I'm directly answering the question you asked. I think you were saying something about with the bridges we build socially as well, correct? And I'm not sure if I totally understand that part of the question.
Well, it's okay. I don't know that any of these questions really have answers per se. I mean, as you're saying that, and as I'm thinking, so maybe I'll ask you this, and then maybe for real, one last one. But I was thinking just back about it's interesting to wonder about why you're so interested in this stuff, because I think a lot of people, they just are interested in it and they're not abstracting out or zooming out in that way. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm just curious, talking about it a little bit, do you feel like you have more questions now as far as why you're so interested in this stuff? Because I think you said that you'll be reading a review, or you'll be reading about some drama around video games online, and just you have that moment, why are you so interested in this stuff? And I think that that's just interesting, because I think many people that I talk to, and I'm not referring necessarily to anyone specifically, that I've interviewed here, they're so consumed by it that they don't realize that they're consumed by it. And I don't know, I guess I'm just curious, just talking about it for a little bit with me, do you feel like you have more questions now? Do you feel like, is there something that I sort of shook loose, maybe, that you understand a little bit better about yourself now, or do you mainly just have more questions?
I think some of it, I think questions I hadn't necessarily anticipated about,
yeah.
I think one of the way you framed your question, why did you choose to engage in video games in this way, was something I was I didn't really at first I was kind of I didn't really choose that, but as I've been chewing that question over on my, you chew questions over as conversations go on, it's I did choose, whether or not it was an active thing or not, this is a thing that somehow or another I chose. It wasn't an instinctive. There's many other things in my life I've encountered that could have taken my interest, and I chose to reject those for some reason or another. And just because it wasn't a big overt choice that I made, there wasn't a fork in the road, and I'm what's it going to be? Is it going to be video games or volleyball? What am I going to do? I'm going video games, dog. That never happened, but I think that that's a really interesting thing that, I don't know if this is satisfying to you, but it's satisfying to me. I'm always satisfied with more. I love more questions, and I love being able to drill into this stuff. And as much as video games get harped on for being a waste of time, and you don't want to lay on your deathbed and think all I did was play video games in my life. To that extent, sitting around and mulling over questions like this is maybe even more masturbatory than video games, but I don't really have any shame in it. I'm always happy, I didn't think about it that way. I get to go and I'm gonna go, after this call, I'm gonna go sit and paint Warhammer miniatures and think about that for the next 4 days or whatever. So I like that.
Well, all right. Well, I'll ask you this one last question. I know before you, not long ago, you just mentioned a sort of reluctance to get too poetic, and please feel free if this is where this question takes you. But so, given all that we've talked about, I mean, what do you feel? What have video games accomplished? And you can interpret that question in any way you wish, whether it's personal to you, if it's a more cosmic interpretation. I really want to just stop talking so that I can just hear your first reaction to that. Just sort of, what have video games accomplished?
I think they've accomplished, just making games be, giving a industrial what do they call it, the military industrial complex, like giving gaming a military, its own like military industrial complex, but totally throwing away military industrial connotations of that. Just like the before video games, there was tabletop games like Parker Brothers and Monopoly and all that stuff, and there's certainly a lot of people involved in those. But to my knowledge, like not to the scale and the scope that video games are, and definitely not as like, I don't know, just like just how they've become a thing, like movies or books or things that are kind of taken for granted as being cultural artifacts or whatever, but are engaged with, and like there's this totally new people have like arguments all the time about what a video game is. Is a video game art? Is it what, and it's just, to me, it's something totally new. Like, it's not art in the sense that like a book is art or a painting is art, and it's not a commercial product in the same way that like, where movies can be like, is it art? Is it a commercial product? It's not the same as that either, where it's kind of straddling that line. It's like, because it engages you in a way and it asks you to interact with it, and it's also not like some people denigrate like, oh no, like a video game can only be played one way, like, and there's only there's a finite number of ways.
Oh, you there? Hello?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Last thing I heard, you said there's a finite number of ways.
Oh yeah, I guess what I'm saying is like video games, the most impressive thing they've done is just carve out they've carved out their own new way that people spend time doing something. And I don't know how to classify that, but it's definitely like sort of in the same genre of like books and movies. And going to, it's a new way for people to derive experience out of life. It's like a whole new genre of that doesn't seem like it existed before, where like there's an imaginary world that doesn't exist in any physical sense, but a lot of people can engage with it at different times, not all at the same time. And you can have like a very similar experience to other people, but it's not going to be the exact same experience, even though you're like, oh yeah, did you fight boss number 4? Like, oh yeah, I headshotted him. Oh man, I stabbed him, whatever. Like, there's just like endless iterations of that, like within this little thing. And like, I don't know, it's just like this new genre of thing that exists. And I just think that's so impressive, and like a way that, I know people are like, oh no, it's not like books. It's not as important as books. But like, who knows? Like books, people are like, books are art, but it's like books are also trash. Like I read the trashiest books, and like, it's not art. It's just like me giving, like the same as you do. Like you play video games at the end of the day because you don't want to look at a screen. Like I read a book and I don't remember what I read. I just do it because I need something to put my eyes on. It's not a computer, and like it's like a total. I'm using it. It's the same function as a TV show or whatever, like, yeah, but it's a book, so it's like, more important. Video games are the same thing. It's like a new genre of thing. Like there's trash video games, but there's video games that are just like going to change your life. Like, and the prevalence of people that like will talk about the end of disc 1 of Final Fantasy VII is just like, that's enough evidence for me to be like, video games have like a very powerful effect on people. And like, there's a lot more examples of that sort of thing happening. And it's having that effect on people within a genre that it itself created. Like, it's not often that you get to see like a whole new type of thing, like a new genre of way that people derive experience. I'm talking in circles here, but like, I just think that's super impressive. Like, they're a new thing. They're super huge. People are playing them. It's so weird. We're all talking about it. Even people that hate them, they still talk about it. I don't know. I think that's super impressive. I get really, I don't know. Obviously, I get really emotional or really into the scope of human experience. I think that is really cool. And, people work, I don't know. I can just go on and on about this stuff. So